You're kind of designing for kindness, for respect for human, not as though you're this godly canon that you just want to keep the eyeballs on you all the time, which, social media has a lot of that type of addictive design behind it.
Welcome to AI for Architects, where we explore how AI and emerging technologies are redefining architecture and the future of design practice. I'm Aya Shlachter, founder and CEO of MGS Global Group, the production partner architecture firms trust, helping 500 plus firms worldwide grow and scale over the past 18 years. Every episode, we bring you conversations with AI experts, architects, and innovators sharing practical insights to help you adopt technology with clarity and build a better practice. Let's begin. So, what if the biggest challenge in AI adoption isn't technology at all, but understanding people, culture, and practices that choose to embrace it? What you're about to hear is one of those conversations that reframes your beliefs. Most conversations about AI focus on tools, prompts, automation, and productivity, but today's guest approaches AI from a very different angle. Before she was leading AI transformation inside one of Australia's leading architecture firms, she was studying languages, living across cultures, conducting ethnographic research in rural Mexico, and exploring how communities remain resilient during times of pressure and change. Today's guest is Annie Ferguson. She heads AI and digital innovation at DKO Architecture, leading one of the most ambitious AI transformations in Australian architecture. She built AI solutions and holds a PhD focused on human resilience and social systems. Her argument is simple and a little uncomfortable. Most firms are getting AI adoption wrong, not because of the tools, because of the people. So, Annie, welcome to AI for Architects. It's wonderful to have you in the show, and I'm really excited to have this conversation. I have so much to ask.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be part of your incredible array of speakers. It's a great podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. I did your research, and you said something like you're willing to talk about a story that is self-deprecating. I'm like, well, did I get that right?
That's probably one of my hallmarks, yes. I would say that I'm not an architect, and I think it's really important for me to kind of know what I'm good at and know what I'm not good at. I work in architecture firms and I watch people doing their work. But yeah, I'm probably the worst architect in our company. And yeah, so I know the area where I can contribute, but I can really look in depth at, I guess, the changes that have happened to the architectural practice, architectural businesses, and architects as people as well, because like everywhere else in the world, there's 4 generations of architects coming in to work in studios, and that brings with it, those 4 generations of people that have got different ways of thinking about going about architecture, different comfort with different types of tools, different understanding of what quality architecture looks like, and, wanting to get different things out of meaningful work as well and how they like to work. So yeah, worst architect in the house talking to you here.
You mentioned something earlier. This is a funny story about the fact that you digitized your entire CD collection before the iPod came out. Can we talk about that a sec? I think that was the story I was looking for.
Okay.
That was hilarious.
So I was obsessed, and when I was a teenager, I was so into music. Was friends with the guys at the HMV store, and I'd kind of go up and find out what the latest was. And my first money I ever earned for myself would always go into CDs, and a new category I was kind of getting into on that particular month. So because I'd sort of considered myself such a music aficionado, when mini discs came out, I was blown away because, there'd been cassettes recording songs off the radio. And then there was, wow, I'm amazing getting my CD collection, which I routinely reorganized. And then when mini discs came out, I thought, fantastic. This is like, they're not going to get scratched. It's going to be longer lasting. It was actually pretty expensive technology when it first came out. So,
Yeah.
for a little teenager to go and sink all of her hard-earned cash in being an early edge adopter of mini discs, I was sort of committed to it. And literally when I finished mini disc digitizing my CD collection, like literally at the end of it, run out of money, and I'm like, here's the future. The first iPod Nano came out and it broke my heart. I broke up with music because I had this huge mini disc collection, which like effectively had zero value now. I went traveling And I lived in Europe for several years, and it took me a long time before I recreated my how do I invest in music, my musical collection, which obviously now Spotify Premium, it's very hard to, not be involved in a premium subscription of Spotify Premium for me. But yeah, the mini disc collection is still sitting in a spot in my garage
Oh gosh. How
somewhere.
many days or months did you do that?
I think it was 4 months. I don't know if like that technology, I feel like I'm the only person that invested in that technology anywhere, but it was a good lesson in, not being bedazzled by the bright and shiny technology, watching tech waves play out so that we don't kind of get caught on the wave that doesn't kind of bring you all the way into the shore. And I think it has kind of stood me instead as I look at other new technologies and solutions and hype cycles in technology, which I think that maybe that was the thing that was missing from my intro. So I've probably spent the last 12, 13 years working in tech companies as a user experience designer. So that, and also it's gone into things like service design. So I have been working as a designer in technology, and being able to have that more a seasoned view of technology longevity and how it applies to a problem keeps being really relevant.
So I know you studied languages and you also have a PhD in human resilience and social systems, and you use languages and your PhD in how you approach work and architecture and AI adoption. Can you talk about that? I really like that a lot.
Yeah, so I only found out about them when I started digging into linguistic literature. They're actually one of the most studied American Indigenous groups in the
Mm,
Americas. The first
yeah.
Indigenous American dictionary was created in this community. So for linguists, this particular community is a little bit renowned in terms of its longevity and how well studied it's been. So yes, it's in Chiapas, and I spent some years back and forth there. But what I really got trained in that process was looking not just at how people are communicating with each other, but the context in which they are communicating together. And that equally applies to the workplace. And I've used it in all of my ethnographic studies for user research, which is, I've kind of worked on software solutions for all different types of professions, payroll, 3D CAD manufacturing simulation software at Autodesk, educational software, learning software. There's been media and like film software, viewing software. So there's been a lot of different contexts that I've gone to, and I've applied some of those ethnographic methods to look a little bit more critically at what are people trying to communicate and achieve here, and also what's the context in which they're operating.
So can you give us an example of like how they were, and like a real example of how the Mexicans were communicate? And you said they're really very complex in their thinking
Mm.
and their community, and how you can apply that to an actual scenario in a firm.
So, an example in Mexico, in Zinacantan, was that there's a feature in turn taking. We're kind of going to go deep here, so hope I don't lose you. But
No, no. I talked to Hank before you, so yes.
so there's a phenomenon there called repair. In conversational turn taking, when people are talking to each other, if you say something and you don't understand, and I don't understand it, typically in whichever language you look at, it will take 3 turn takings in the conversation before you repair it. So if I was to say to you, hey, Aya, have you seen the gobbledygook? And you'd be like, what? The what? And I'd say, didn't you see the gobbledygook? And you'll say, did you say gobbledygook? And I said, yes, the gobbledygook. This is a gobbledygook. So there's only been 3 what we call turn taking episodes, and typically people repair it. It might be that you end up learning what a gobbledygook is, or it might be that I said gobbledygook the wrong way. But typically it would take 3 exchanges of me saying it, you going, what? Me clarifying, you kind of working out whether you understood it, and then coming back, and we've done what we call repair in a conversation. In Zinacantan, they can go up to like 8 turn takings and still not achieve repair, which is unusual in a conversation in any place. And when you look closer into it, the fact that they've had to spend so many years in such tight proximity to each other, there's a thing around interpersonal distance. So even though they're very living with their mother and people have found ways to, I guess, create a little bubble of protection around themselves, with people not necessarily knowing all of someone's inner ideas, while still, being very tightly bound to quite a closed community.
Is it because they're all living together constantly in a small community? That's why they're able to do that?
I don't necessarily kind of say the exact reasons on why, but what I did
Mm.
was I noticed phenomena that was unusual in other places. And yeah, so there's a few different musings where I had on, it could be A, B, or C. But if we kind of translate that, and let's look at architects working in studios today. And I look at, for example, designers trying to be conceptually adventurous, with early stage project on everything that it could be, and how could I communicate it in a compelling, exciting way while still kind of not becoming unrealistic for this client. So trying to be, let's say, very creative with a client brief, versus a documentation person that's trying to really ensure that the right defects and checks and, building installation kind of knowledge has been factored properly into any documentation. I look at those different people talking on a daily basis. I'd look at our finance our finance people working under their constraints, and, the realities of an architectural practice, which is billable hours and the need to track and manage all of that. So I look at each of these different pockets of our business, and I kind of see the different contexts that people are trying to communicate, and then I unpack that to what technology or data solutions do they need, not just in terms of the label on the box, but also how does it need to be used by them.
So is that part of your ethnography background where you're embedding, like it's embedding yourself in the community to understand how it really works? So you really understand each department and and empathize with them and see their pain points. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, you got it.
Yeah. So how did you transition from being a PhD in that to being in software? Because we're going to talk about your what you did in Autodesk and what you're doing in your current firm. Like, how did that happen? Because I want to know the in between, like from somebody who's in linguistics to technology.
Yes. So I guess the catchword there is ethnography, and
Yes.
human-centered designers, which I guess, architects have been so busy architecting, they're probably not aware of the design change that's gone on in user experience design, human-centered design, service design, these kind of the design aspects of technology, and services and technology. And I got early contracts. I'd always kind of done things in digital media. At Lonely Planet, I was part of the crew that were tasked with, in a agile way, I think it was 2010 around then, taking our well kind of oiled travel publication books and turning them into digital ebooks. And it was kind of like us versus Google Maps in a way, if you think about the reviews. Then I started getting involved in agile scrums and getting taken on the tech journey of how do you design and deploy software very rapidly that has factored in user needs and, comes out in something that users love at the end. And that sort of started evolving. I started getting contracts. I started getting work with like enterprises big and small on these human-centered design, service design contracts. But then I started having my own ideas about software I wanted to build, and I started designing that myself. And then I started getting UX and UI design skills. And then after a couple of failed startups, which I was convinced were going to sort of take over the world, I ended up just kind of more consistently getting user experience design roles and having things from like being an individual contributor to head of and more lead roles in that space. And 10 years went by.
Yes, it's like you're always at the cusp from your mini disc to the iPod mini, and then from Lonely Planet physical books to digitizing them, and now AI, right? You're just right. You're perfect timing,
It's yeah,
right?
pioneer. I think I
Yeah,
have a lineage of pioneers in my ancestry.
yeah,
I think I kind of have got the pioneer gene.
that's amazing. So let's talk about your work at Autodesk. Doing my research, you said you reduced operational inefficiency by 75% at DKO, but you worked at Autodesk where you built AI powered tools that cut design time in half.
I'm not quite sure. They're not quite ringing true for me. So at
Yeah.
Autodesk, I was looking at software which is around the plastic manufacturing sector. So when you
Okay.
manufacture plastic things, like for example, an iPod case or an iPhone case, you need to design it, but you also need to simulate the plastic manufacturing process of filling it with all of the plastic and then packing it
Mm.
down and it cooling so that it comes out and it doesn't have blemish marks on it and it's not going to break. Um, it's an interesting space for software to be in, which is kind of replicating the manufacturing process so that when you go to actual production, which is a pretty expensive thing with steel mold blocks, you're not going to go and produce a steel mold that produces defective plastic outputs at the end. So this software replicates that whole thing. It's a confined user base, but it's quite specialist software.
So
Yeah.
it's not AutoCAD. It's something related to industrial design.
It's more in the manufacturing sector. Yeah. So Autodesk, as you're probably aware, is a pretty big organization. It's
Yes,
got
yes,
different
yeah,
pillars. I
yeah,
wasn't in the AEC pillar. I was working in the manufacturing. But yeah, a lot of constraints around 3D CAD modeling and then applying sort of pretty sophisticated analysis
yeah.
to happen to a 3D model. Um, that was my world. And yeah, it was the first time that I'd worked with such a large software company.
Wow. So, like you said, you mentioned earlier, you're not an architect, but I think that architecture firms need non-architects to help them because architects are very focused on their craft. And we need some people like you or like finance people or COOs to really think outside the box and really zoom out. So
Yeah.
I think your firm is lucky to have you. My cousin, for instance, was an investment banker in a big bank in New
Mhm.
York City, but she didn't even study finance. She studied like history and she was an English major because people who have, like historical background, they have background in history, have a better understanding of what goes on around the world, the culture and society, which is what that was your background, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'm a humanities person at the back, at the core, but I've picked up technology knowledge through working in industry. But I think that, you're really right. I see a couple of things that I want to touch on that you said around, having people like me in architecture companies. As technology comes out and people are able to kind of build a lot of adjacent skills, like, architects can go and vibe code and, people that just like photos can start making movies. And like we're starting to be able to use technologies to do adjacent things to us that we weren't previously able to do. But I see that, I mean, if I was to go and redesign my house, I can tell you, it doesn't matter what generative software I use, I know that I'm not going to have as good ideas as the guys in my studio or the ladies and men in my studio would have around remodeling my house. So I think that while architecture companies try to do a lot of the stuff themselves and they, if they've tried to be their billing and they've tried to be their technology providers, going from the analog world of stencils and drawing and tracing to what was, I guess, the emergence of BIM in, is it late 80s, 90s that BIM emerged
Mhm.
as a thing in architecture. But I think we're now in a world where technology has become quite complex and it's not just modeling software. Like you need to have your whole kind of ecosystem well tailored. And I've been saying this a little bit lately. I'm not sure if architects like it, but I actually see the parallels between doctors, lawyers, and architects because they work in a build our craft or practice. A doctor is not meant to be sitting there learning how to use AI tools. She's meant to be, making sure she's getting her diagnoses correct and referring people correctly. And lawyers are not meant to be working out, what are the latest tools in editing. They're meant to be giving the right advice to people. And because their focus, their professional training and, ability is defined on that practice, they have accumulated over the last 10 to 20 years, I guess, a bit of a handicap in terms of keeping up with where you compare technology companies to be at. If you look at the
Right.
way, if I think about what it's like to work in a technology company versus working in a law firm or an architect studio as a technologist, they're worlds apart in terms of technology literacy. So that's just an interesting perspective from my side that, there's very good reasons for it. And it's also a
Yeah.
bit of a data issue. Like doctors' data is their patient records, and they kind of like can't afford to have it messed with. And architects need to get their drawings out, and they can't afford to be, sent in different directions with different drawing tools constantly. They need to be able to be getting things over the line. So there's a real sensitivity in how do you kind of come into that type of environment and make the little adjustments, which in the moment aren't really experiments. They're actually known ways to make something better. Can you imagine if I sent a bunch of architects down to go and get, their mini disc recordings and come out with a failed, solution for a client? You kind of can't do that in a professional billing practice.
That's true.
Mm.
So so how did you end up in architecture? I wanted to ask that, like from Autodesk to architecture, how did that happen?
How did that happen? I actually had a different contract. I think I worked at a superannuation place in between.
Yeah.
So they're user experience contracts, but I've always been in the user experience domain. I've always kind of like worked on the more complex, data heavy. Often user experience designers get a little bit overwhelmed when things are really complex solutions with specialist experts. And because that's sort of always been a little bit my shtick in, designing technology for people who've got quite specialist requirements. Yeah, that was just a role. But I think it was quite visionary of like the firm that I work for at DKO. I think, they've had a really interesting leadership journey over the last 27 years. And they've got some quite visionary thoughts in, who they want to be and how they want to get there. So I thank them for bringing me in and like coming up with the idea that they wanted to have someone steer the practice through everything that AI, presents to us.
If you're running a growing architecture firm, you're probably not short on projects, you're short on people. Talent shortage is real. Finding and retaining skilled professionals takes time. Meanwhile, deadlines keep getting closer. And when you're balancing growth with quality, it gets harder to maintain your project standards as the work piles up. We are here to bridge the gap. We provide qualified architecture staff on demand so you can scale your delivery without compromising quality. That's what MGS Global Group does. Whether you're overwhelmed with construction documentation, need BIM support, or your internal systems just aren't built for this level of growth, our team plugs in seamlessly. Think of us as an extension of your in-house team without the long hiring process. And because we work across time zones, your projects keep moving even after your office closes for the day. If your timelines are starting to feel stretched and your team's at capacity, visit mgsglobalgroup.com. We can get started in 24 hours. We're here to help you scale smarter and deliver faster with quality, consistency, and peace of mind. That's actually very refreshing because a lot of firms don't see the value in hiring, and spending outside of just architecture and marketing, right? Like to have a
Hmm.
technologist and somebody with your background and experience and is not in architecture, that's really admirable. And I think a lot of firms should be doing that kind of thing, right? Hiring people outside of the profession. But as a woman and a leader, You mentioned something about feminine leadership. Can you talk about that? How do you lead? And it's like, what is the conversation around feminine leadership and technology?
Yeah. So I think, there's a big gap every time that I hear a technology podcast. It's pretty rare that it's a female, leading the pack or kind of like the shining star or the person. There's definitely a few of them out there, but I think that it's really important that the idea on how we use tools doesn't get taken into a place that becomes ungrounded or, taken out of the context of use. When I've worked in technology places, often the person who's really kind of like pulled together the real orchestration of things, they've often been female leaders. They're not, super visible or very prominent. But I think that a lot of, fantastic contributions come from often women will bring to the table thinking that grounds it a little bit better in context, can think through the kind of realities of end user needs or how people are applying it in their everyday thing, people that may not necessarily be technologists or developers, or they're able to bring in some of that otherworldly thinking. If you really kind of unpack it, technology today has got all of these ideas around, coding and Python and, engineering, but like a fork is a piece of technology. Chopsticks are a piece of technology. They've actually been refined. Chopsticks is an incredible piece of technology. If you look at how many things people use, like I've seen people using chopsticks as tongs, as stirrers, obviously as eating utensils, as knives. I think we've gotten into a world where we associate technology with, Silicon Valley and that kind of thing. But if you really pull it down, technology is a tool. It's helping someone do something. That's what it's meant to be doing. It's not there for its own sake. It's meant to be helping people do things. And, in the AI rush, there's been a lot of like a solution without a problem. They were like, we've worked
Oh,
out.
that's interesting. A solution without a problem. Can you unpack that?
Yeah. So, AI has been born out of, they've worked out how to use language models or, the models that can look at data and learn off data and learn intelligently off data. And then they've been like, well, where do we apply this to? Now that we can do this, who's going to use it? What are they going to use it for? And I think we're kind of the shift is starting to change, but definitely for the last maybe 3 years, it has been AI is a solution, a technology solution, and they're not sure who has a problem that they want to fix it to. And this is where the prominence of, vibe coding and people going, oh, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. But it, when you see product marketing that has, here's a piece of software and it's got the AI button, to me, that's they don't actually know what it solves. Because if they knew what it solved, they'd be like intelligent reporting or, fast CAD drawer. It'd be CAD drawing, but because they don't yet know how it can be applied, they stick the AI button and it's kind of up to the user to work out what problem they're going to solve with it.
Is this what your concept of optics and science? Like optics versus science? Like optics, you just put the AI term, and then science is what is the reason behind it? I know you mentioned something about AI adoption, and is it just for show or there's a solution for that problem?
Yeah, like I think at the moment, the idea that you can use different types of AI tools and features as a shortcut is how a lot of people are using it, but actually using it to really, really solve a problem takes a little bit more. Yeah, to use AI to really solve a problem, it takes a fair bit of thinking about the problem, containerizing the problem, thinking about how I would approach it with different AI tools. So that's what I think there's the shortcut AI, which is sort of open and available to the masses. If you think about visualization in architecture, I'm not going to say it's a race to the bottom, but anyone can kind of go and get some interesting visuals done on a building facade now in different tools. Yes, there's going to be people that apply more of their visual aesthetic, which is honed over many years, and they're able to think a lot more carefully about really crafting an image that tells a deeper story about that specific site. So it's not that there's no value to be brought in there by someone who's got an architectural critical mind. But I do think that there's going to be a different type of win that to me is probably the more interesting and valuable win around architecture practices, looking carefully at where are the areas that we feel like we're not doing and really carefully unpacking the problem of how do we feel we need to improve in this area, and then at some point getting AI to help them in there. In our studio, we have a kind of company value or mission to design and leave spaces that leave a lasting legacy. So to leave a greater design legacy. So for us, that's an interesting problem for us to be looking at. How are we able to bring like thinking of how is this building looking in 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 years through what we're doing now.
So now I'm glad that we're going into the architecture and nitty-gritty. How do we make AI adoption feel like better in practice, not just faster? How can we make sure that AI adoption feels like you mentioned it's not just about the tools, but better practice and really having humanity and culture at the center of it? So how are you doing that as you walk into the firm? You're relatively new in architecture space, and how was that transition and what did that feel like for you?
Yeah, like I said, I think the anthropologist in me, I'm always like over checking out, like I have one of the things I love about the way that I work in technology is I get to have like a new profession. And until now, I've been able to like work in so many different professions, but as the technologist, not as the teacher or not as the super advisor. And one thing that really stood out to me is when I walked into DKO specifically is that they're a multidisciplinary practice. So we've got interior designers, landscape designers, and architects. And so there's a bit of a multidisciplinary, aspect to the practice.
Mhm.
So a bit of it is noticing the kind of like what's common but what's different to those different disciplines. I think also we have I think it's a wonderful kind of motto. The founder of our company, when I first came in, he said, "Annie, I just want everyone to be kind."
I
And
love that. I love that.
it's really stayed with me because I actually think what I'm trying to do there is find kind ways to help people come and be less overwhelmed, feel like they're more competent at their particular job, finding ways to do something that yesterday was causing pain. And today, because I helped them apply this thing, it's actually, okay, we've jumped over that hurdle. I'm not really big on a lot of what I would call it propaganda around the, jobs AI is going to take people's jobs. Obviously, I'm not a prophet, but I don't really subscribe to the apocalyptic things there. I think there's been, I think that the AI wave is going to be maybe as big as what smartphones and what the internet was. But I don't necessarily think it's going to be, apocalyptically bigger than those things. They were pretty big inventions, like having a
Yeah.
smartphone and having the internet. The world before the internet was a pretty different place.
I know. I mean, I moved to the US at 19, and before that my friends and I were just sending letters, right? Like from the Philippines, like 2 weeks, right? And then when email came, I'm like, "Oh wow,
Yeah.
it's dating." Like So in the firm, right? Can you talk a little bit about like the type of tools that you use, or like how was it teaching the people in studio to adapt to different tools? What was that like? Like, do you just observe most of the workflows and then come up with solutions? Like, really tactical knowledge for architecture firms who want to start exploring AI in their practice.
Look, I would say explore your problems before you start thinking about the technology. So explore an area that, we know this is a thing that's causing pain for us, because that's where the real wins are. And I don't know what every single person's business or practice is going to look like that, but being able to kind of say, this is a problem, and then being able to put some kind of metric around it. Like, let's say, for example, putting out a bid or a proposal is currently taking you a really long time. You say, okay, well, how long does it typically take? Let me look at it. Actually, it's taken me 7 weeks from someone's telling me they wanted a proposal to me getting something out there. What can I do to make it a really high quality proposal? And high quality means acceptable fee, structured to the client brief, whatever it might be. But also, how can I do that in, set yourself a target, the 2 weeks thing, and then drill down onto that, because I think starting with problems, it grounds you, because once you start looking out there at AI solutions, there's a lot of marketing out there and everything looks amazing and everything looks cool. It may not work to your data. It may not produce bids in the wet format that you need. It may not be able to look into your email files. So knowing what your requirements are is really important. I think relate it to a teenage girl who's like wants to buy some new clothes. It's like, well, work out your style first. Don't just run around all the stores and go, I found this thing, I loved it. It's like, what look are you going for? And then let's shop to that. Let's go with a really intentional way of going into this space, because otherwise, you mentioned earlier the overwhelm factor, and so much money, as you know, has been raised by AI companies, tech companies. Putting the word of AI onto your thing means all of this marketing, effort gets put behind it. And it is really easy as a consumer, as an end user, to look like everything out there does all this magic stuff, but you need to know what your needs are.
I love the analogy of the high schooler trying to buy clothes. You can't just go and buy, go to every store. You need to hone in on the style. I like that. So what do you think some of the mistakes, architecture firms make when they blindly adopt technology and not really hone in? Because a lot of firms, first of all, it's not the firm's fault. It's just that they're so busy. There's no intentionality, right? Like people are just busy, so busy nowadays that there's no time to learn different tools. So how do you resolve that issue in adoption when people are confused, they don't have time?
Yeah, I think I feel like I'm sounding like a broken record, but I'm probably like back to, don't bother with it unless you know what problems you've got.
Exactly. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, like just go, I'm actually going to look at this problem and we're going to look at fixing it. Because as I said, like, let's flip it, right? Let's go back to Annie architecting a house. Yes, I could go and use SketchUp and do all these things. I don't actually have the critical thinking that knows what makes a really good laundry. I could think about it carefully, or I could go and just carve out a lunchtime with one of the architects at my thing and go, hey, I need to like redesign my kitchen. Can you just talk me through? Here's my current floor plan. I know I need this and this and this. What would you do? And they'd have a little chat. Great. I've got some expert knowledge. Now I might be able to go. Possibly, being able to go and like use AI to help you understand your problems. So, talking to Claude or whatever your tool of choice is on, I've got this problem around marketing. I've got this problem around bids. I don't know what's, working, really unpacking what would a more expert person tell me about how to go about solving my problem? Because there's a step before you go to a solution, which is I've got an informed and expert opinion on what my actual problem is, and then being able to go out to the tool, perhaps.
That's great. I had an experience with this lady who called me because she knew I run a architecture podcast for AI. So she was so excited to talk to me. And she's like, I'm so excited. I hope you can answer all my questions. What AI tool should I use for my firm? I'm like, there are 1,500 AI tools. And there are also like 30 types of, project types, from multifamily, residential, single family, interior, there's no one tool that can solve the problem. It's not like Revit and AutoCAD that there's two tools that everybody used, right?
Yeah.
And I said, I'm sorry, but I can't help you. You need to understand the problem and what the scope and your clients and all the things. So I understand what you're saying. It's really, when you use AI, it needs to really be, problem solving. It doesn't have to be this massive undertaking. It's
Mm.
small things that will generate solutions and, you know, improve your time and profitability in the end, right? You don't have to get
Yeah,
some
and I just think
major adaptation. Yeah.
yeah, and like we were saying before, I think it's good to keep in mind that, AI gets marketed a certain way. Sometimes it's just an improvement on your email rules. Like maybe you don't need an email AI tool. Maybe you just need to learn how to set up rules in your email. Maybe you don't need to buy, a mid-journey thing. Maybe you just need to learn how to set certain lighting filters in Photoshop. But you need some instructions on that. It's micro skill upgrading. I've been walking through our studio a little bit recently of, there's 4 ways of looking at a problem. They have something and they're like, AI should fix this. I'm like, just run through the 4 steps. Is it that I just need to focus a little bit harder applying the knowledge I already have? Do I need to go and get a micro skill learning? So go and ask Claude, how do I fix lighting in Photoshop so that it looks like directional light coming across my wall? It might go and give you 5 steps on how to do that. Is it that I actually need a generative visualization tool, or am I actually needing to go and do some kind of analysis? Like, what would light look like at this particular, site on a sunset evening? Like, what direction would it be coming through? So kind of going through those 4 steps on, it's not always jump to AI thinking there's this magic shortcut. It could be, but there could also be a couple of other ways to get to your desired outcome, which also brings with it the competence factor, right? So if you're just
Ooh, I like that.
there's a magic tool out there somewhere that knows how to do everything better than you, what happens really quickly is that when people start doing that, they stop believing that they're competent at solving problems themselves.
Annie, I love the 2 things
So
that you mentioned: micro skill learning and the competence factor. Those are my takeaways. Like, you're right. Like, if you rely on AI too much, Claude, like, what about your original thinking, right? Like, you just talk to Claude all the time, and it's insecurity, right? If you don't have the internal knowledge, then you won't have the confidence to make decisions. So
yes. Yeah.
so I like that competence factor. Like, yeah, go ahead.
One of the things that came up in my PhD was a guy, I think his name was Kubler. He has this, the learning cycle. And he kind of says that if you don't pass through these 4 steps, you never learn anything. And his idea is you need to have a hypothesis like, I want to cook a cake. You need to go and find out some information. What's a recipe for a cake? I like this recipe. I'm going to try this recipe. Then you need to actually do it. You need to cook a cake. And then you need to go, oh, that cake actually turned out pretty well on the top, but next time I'm going to try, buttering the pan because it's a bit kind of dry on the outside. And then you revisit it. And it's through passing through all of those steps that you actually learn true knowledge and you actually understand a thing. If you skip those things, like for example, if you say, I want to cook a cake, and then you're like, I'm just going to do this one because I read a blog post and they said to do it like this. And then you do it. But turns out you actually didn't have the right kind of pan, or your oven doesn't work like that. It doesn't bake through. And then you need to have kind of passed through the steps to kind of really round out that knowledge acquisition process. That always sticks with me, as well as, don't think we know things until we've been able to give it a little test and apply it to something ourselves. So often finding a way to do a small application of it is a good approach.
I love that. I learned this term in one of the AI lectures that I attended. One of the speakers said, there's so much AI slop out there, but people need to earn the right to use AI. And when I say earn the right, it means going through those 4 steps, right? like, the competency factor. That's great, Annie. I really love that, because we don't want to be incompetent anymore. It's so easy to just rely on, AI. So that's great information. As we're closing the episode, I really want to know your thoughts about two things: AI burnout and the backlash of, AI. A lot of people are hating on AI right now,
Mm,
right? If
mm.
you go online, people are like, AI is, bad for the environment. AI makes you dumb, blah blah blah, all the things.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that, and also AI burnout, and how do you navigate that?
I might firstly approach the AI hate factor. And to me, there's a correction. You know, there's been AI expectations that have been set at a very high bar, really motivated by companies that are trying to hit very high IPO valuations and that type of thing. So, you know, we go back to the product marketing. The AI marketing has been really oversold, I would say. And I think that there is a bit of a correction as the consumer market, you know, end users that are kind of like going, hang on, is it really as amazing as that? You know, all the news articles and things. And so I think it's an understandable correction. We talk about the big wave, you know, the technology waves. And I think this is part of that. So I kind of completely understand that. And I think AI has its place and it's also not everything. And, you know, it was
Yeah.
sold a little bit before as being like it's just going to replace your entire job or, you know, it's kind of everything. So I think there's that correction and that's understandable. And as I said before as well, I think that it is the burnout thing. I think there's a line between using AI for shortcuts and then feeling overwhelmed with areas where people realize they're not feeling competent anymore. You and I have talked about that a little bit already. But then I think additionally, there are people that are using AI as a learning partner, a development partner, and they keep it a little bit more managed in terms of here's how much time, here's the problem I'm going to it about, but I'm not sort of going to try and build my whole company off it, or I'm not going to try and do all my designs off it. I'm just going to see if it can help
Yeah.
me with,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, these particular. So I think that, you know, I don't know if you've noticed, but recently, like the Claude models have introduced a thing like, hey, you don't need to talk to me about this anymore. You know, like it's designed to stop encouraging people talking to it about things. Once you've gone to it for a particular task and it meets it, it's often says like, hey, time to go to bed now. Like, glad we wrapped that one up. They don't encourage you to keep coming back, which, you know, I've got a lot of ways that I love Claude, but I really like that they've deliberately designed to not kind of constantly expand the user engagement with it. You just go for it to it for your task and then leave.
Oh, I didn't know that part. That's great. That's good to know. I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
And their user experience design of Claude products has been, I would say, applied in the way that I've been trained, you know, in my UX training to make sure that you're kind of designing for kindness, for respect for human, not as though you're this godly canon that you just want to keep the eyeballs on you all the time, which, you know, social media has a lot of that type of addictive design behind it. So I think, does that answer, do you think, your questions around
Yes,
burnout?
absolutely. Yeah. That's true. Like, it's good that they have a stop, because you're right, you can get into the rabbit hole. I'm a firm owner. A lot of firm owners just want to be always productive. I can do this, I can do that for my website, I can do this, everything you can do, because Claude is so amazing, and ChatGPT. And at the end of the day, you end up doing nothing because
Mm.
everything is there, right? So, any parting thoughts you want to leave with some firm owners who just want to get started?
Say, yeah, particular area that might even be you know, AI is really good at things that you're not good at. So it's good to use AI for the thing that you're not particularly good at. If you're already good at beautiful renders, I would say probably don't go and maximize on the renders that you're already good at. Go and apply it to something that you're not good at, and it will get you 60% of the way. And then you're going to need to work out how you get from that 60% to the 100% on that thing that you've assigned it to. And factor in for that. Factor in that, I'm going to get AI to help me with this thing. Because it's a thing I don't understand very well, I'm going to need some extra time at the end to get it all the way to the end. And then, being able to manage your time in that way, I think can make it less disappointing, less frustrating, more fruitful,
Thanks so much, Annie, for joining us on the AI for Architects podcast. That 60% rule is really nice because you really break it down to just one thing that will prevent burnout, especially as firm owners. And I really enjoyed our conversation. That's Annie Ferguson. If one thing landed for you today, share it because this conversation is exactly what this industry needs more. I'll link everything in the show notes. Until next time, keep building.
Thank you so much for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks for joining us in another episode of AI for Architects. I hope today's episode sparked your curiosity about AI's impact and opportunities in architecture. Subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss our upcoming episodes, and sign up for our newsletter for exclusive content and AI tool reviews at aiforarchitects.ai/subscribe. This podcast is brought to you by MGS Global Group, driving growth for architects everywhere.